Hey guys, how's it going? This is Natinator. Welcome back to your weekly dose of Creepypasta. It's been quite a while since we did a series on the channel. Although this one's only a two-parter, it still counts. It's also been a while since my last collaboration. So today, I've enlisted the help of a very talented voice actor in this community. You might know of him, it's Terrance Nicholson. Go ahead and check his stuff out and give him some love, links in the description. Huge thanks to him as well. Before we rush on in, I want to thank the patrons over on Patreon as well, making it worth the time to be a bit extra with this story. Shoutouts as always to The Disciples, Tiffany, Subscribe SoundCloud, Teddy Dog, Kissing and Gunshots, Backwards D-Dog, Rambo Rowe, Vera Ohio, and Sylvia Kirschbaum. Thank you for going out of your way to show that support. It's really too kind of you guys. Now, as always, turn out the lights, get comfortable, and let the story begin. Dreams. It all started with a dream. It wasn't anything ambitious or grand that I yearned for. All I wanted was freedom. But time has a funny way of twisting things. Now all I dream of is the end. Every night and every contemplative waking moment, my thoughts and dreams are haunted by the same 20-year-old memory and the nightmarish visions of our near future. Dreams of the night the heavens above my home split apart, and hellfire rained down. Dreams of the damned and their agonized screams, as their collective hands, fused and deformed eternally, reach for the sky, pleading for mercy. Dreams of what's to come, the rift in the sky spreading, and growing large enough to consume the entire world, and humanity being plunged into an era of unfathomable horror from which it will never escape. I dreamt of my fate and the role I played. I've dreamt of the Crimson Throne Room, kneeling before the harbinger of our doom, as her bishops placed an ivory crown upon my head, and his rewards for bringing forth her reign. For 2 decades, these dreams have plagued me. For 20 years, I've awakened, awash in despair, knowing that these were visions of my sinful past and an inevitable future. In my youth, a man told me that our lives are nothing but the consequences of our choices. At first I disregarded it, laughed it off. However, the consequences of the sins I committed have been unraveling themselves before my eyes for over 2 decades. So who got the last laugh? The way things played out, no one. I awoke yesterday to the murky twilight that precedes dawn, bleary-eyed and anxious. 2 days before the 20th anniversary of the night it all went to shit. Over the last few months, within my dreams, they've beckoned, no, demanded for my return. I knew this time I wouldn't escape its call. A week ago, I received a call from the only other person in the world who could understand what I was going through. The true catalyst behind my suffering. We decided it would be best for both of us to make the journey home. We had no idea what awaited us and what would happen, but it would be best to answer the calls, lest we incur any unwanted consequences. Knowing that this might be the last time I'd see my family, I slipped into my daughter's room to plant a kiss on her head. Without uttering a single word to a still sleeping wife, I stepped outside, into a world teetering on the edge of apocalypse. As I started to drive, I thought about what my life had come to. The wife, the kid, the white picket fence and the white-collar job. It all seemed so mundane. Of course, any sense of normality was corrupted long ago. But I still attempted to go through the motions of maintaining the appearance of an everyday Joe. A family man, just wanting to provide what's best for his family and maintain a sane, stable household. All just faux traditionalism, feigning worry for the future that awaits our children in the face of significant societal change. All while knowing what truly awaits us is much worse. It's almost funny to me when I see the men and women of my social groups clutch their pearls over the most inconsequential things. I mocked it all once. This kind of life, and the ideals that perpetuated it. Drunk on teenage hubris. I once wished it would all just crumble away. I wonder what old me would say if he saw me now. Why did I care? The drive to Salt Lake City came and went in a dizzying blur, and by midday had found the shitty diner we agreed to meet. He sat, hidden away in a corner. Despite his imposing appearance, he always blended into the background. Approaching him, I was shocked by how little time had dulled his features. A myriad of faded tattoos and week-old stubble hinted at his age, but his hard-set eyes still radiated a youthful fervor. He bore the resemblance of the cruel Emperor Caracalla in his eyes and resting scowl. Though he was a year older than me and neared 40, he looked 10 years younger.
It's been a while, Jack.
He greeted. Not long enough, Don. He let out a chuckle. Don's usual cynical gruff was always broken by his laugh, an almost childish sound that used to come off as sweetly innocent. Now it felt more condescending than anything.
Hungry?
Don asked. We don't really have time to waste.
You eager to rush towards death?
I doubt we'll be that lucky, I said, getting up. My response drew another laugh from Don as he followed me out. The next few hours were spent on lonely highways, barreling toward that wretched place. The mere thought of it caused a tempest of unrestrained dread to whip about violently through the landscape of my mind. But a serene calm tends to prelude the most turbulent of storms. I found mine in the nostalgic dreams that followed my slumber. Peace, for the first time in 20 years. When you're my age, it's almost a certainty that you'll look back through your entire life and dream of returning to the rosy days of youth, back when the world was vast and vibrant. I dreamt of Sunset Valley, my former home, a tiny Ohio town with a population that barely broke 2,000. Small and close-minded, everyone knew everyone, and gossip was rampant. It was stifling for those who longed for more than a life of conformity and condemnatory glares. In Sunset Valley, no one ever moved in or left. The people that lived there had done so for generations, and it was general reputation that dictated the social hierarchy. Don's family, the Morettis, had been the town fuck-ups for decades, so naturally, no one respected them. I was lucky to be born into a hardly notable family. The only expectations placed on me were to keep my head low and stay out of trouble. My family feared the townspeople and the ire of their judgment. Unfortunately for them, I was too unruly, selfish, and stupid to obey my family's single request. I guess that's why the day I met Don was truly the beginning of the end. I was introduced to Don through a mutual friend, Dark hair, dark-eyed, dark mood, tall and well-built. Don was the local pot dealer, and during my teen years, cannabis seemed like a simple enough rebellion. We could have just stayed as dealers and buyers, but there was something magnetic about Don. A pervasive charisma made him impossible to ignore. He didn't take shit from anyone, not from other teens, adults, authority figures, or an entire town's dogma. He was willing to carve out his own path, regardless of who disapproved. And though Don might have had a boisterous presence, the man himself was quite reserved, preferring to keep to himself. He didn't like unnecessary interaction. I guess he appealed to a part of me that saw itself as small, hopeless, and I felt the need to get closer to him, befriend him, as if a bit of his lion-hearted nature would rub off on me, and I wouldn't feel so uncertain of my future, of my place in the world. It took time, but eventually, I broke through his stoic exterior. I became his closest friend and found that elusive driving force that motivated him so much. A dream that we grew to share. But the pitfalls of youth that are our hearts always crave more, too greedy for stagnation. Our bond grew beyond what was considered acceptable. For as long as I remembered, there was a line drawn in the sand, and in our youthful bravado, we eagerly crossed it. As morning light roused me from my slumber, I became aware of a dull ache deep in my chest. My eyes blurred, and I wiped away the tears beginning to form. For the first time in 2 decades, my dreams hadn't been plagued by horrors that befell my home, but instead, yearning for the blissful, reckless days of my youth. Anger set in when I realized that not even the passage of time had weakened his influence over me. I turned to face him. I was angry that I couldn't bring myself to hate him, that he made me ache for something that had died and been buried decades ago. I was mad because I didn't know if he felt the same, or if I was just the last remaining shard of a long-forgotten past. I tried to tell myself that I wasn't the one at fault. Not entirely, at least. Just like an accessory to murder, I stood complacent and watched the predator commit his crime. That is my sin. Can't say I wasn't warned, though, so I'll take my share of the blame. If he was aware of my current resentment, he didn't show it. Don just yawned and asked if we could switch places. I took the wheel as he tried to get comfortable in the passenger seat to rest. I drove for a couple of hours before the pains of hunger forced me to pull into a nearby rest stop. Its run-down diners and shops looked far more appealing than ever. I took only a few steps outside before I felt the sensation of being watched. I spun around to face the nearby woods. However, it was from my periphery that I saw movement, shaky and wholly unnatural. I turned to face it and was met with the sight of a contorted figure peeking out from behind a tree. It noticed my gaze and tried to move closer, its malformed bones splintering and cracking beneath its pale flesh. The way its limbs strained and contorted should have been impossible for any healthy organism on this earth. Anyone else might have brushed it off as a severely injured animal hobbling about. But I had seen them enough in my dreams that I knew to recognize their sporadic movements. I rushed back into the car and floored it out of the rest stop as I shook Don awake.
What is it?
Don asked in a groggy voice. I don't know, but I saw something. Something wrong. Jesus, Dawn. It's all sorts of fucked up.
So what? What did it look like?
I think it was one of her scavengers. Dawn was fully awake now, brows furrowed in concern.
Well, shit. You've seen them too then. The flesh constructs.
In my dreams.
Well, I guess things are getting down to the wire.
The fuck's that supposed to mean?
It means the things we've seen in our dreams are starting to bleed through into reality. It means me, you, and the whole world are officially on borrowed time.
Dawn said grimly. So that's it then? Are we just marching willingly toward our death? Ours and everyone else's? Christ, Dawn. I've got a family to worry about. What about them? I should just turn this car around and try to—
You know you can't do that, Jack. You've had the dreams. The ones of being dragged back to sunset and into the gates of hell. You know what will happen if we turn back.
So what the fuck am I supposed to do?
Ain't much you can do, Jack. I've been planning something for years now, but I'm not sure how that's gonna play out in the end.
Once again, what the fuck does that mean? Dawn only answered with an indecipherable smirk. With that, he settled into silence, and I chose not to press him further. It didn't matter anyway. Soon enough, we'd be in the presence of her unrelenting evil, and our lives would more than likely be forfeited to her. So, I chose to sulk and spend the next few hours driving quietly. The sights and sounds blurred together into an amalgamation of empty highways, a noisy car engine, and the acrid smell of gasoline. When it was my turn to switch with Don, he suggested pulling over so we could both get some rest. And since we were ahead of our schedule, I agreed. We drove into one of the many seedy motels that dotted all the highway, and threw myself on the undoubtedly filthy pull-out sofa bed.
So, what have you been up to these last 20 years, Jack?
Don asked. I considered not answering him, but I was curious to know the same about him. Nothing. Nothing of note, at least. I'm just living my life as normally as I can. I saw the edge of his eyebrow twitch, as if he was expecting my answer, but still couldn't completely hide his disdain. What about you? I asked.
After sunset, I ran with a gang. We stole art from rich art collectors for other rich art collectors.
Ha, yes. Don Moretti and his penchant for thuggish behavior. The edges of his mouth creased in a subtle grin at my remark.
Well, that only lasted for about a year. It made decent money, but it wasn't sustainable. Shortly after, I found a different group to run with. Well, more like a small organization, really.
An organization? What kind?
Investigative. Kinda like private detectives, but they looked into things regarding the occult, supernatural shit.
I held back a laugh, an action that drew a glare from Don. It softened and faded from his face as fast as it had formed.
Don't tell me that after everything you've seen and experienced, you're still a skeptic. Come on, Jack. I thought you were smarter than that.
No, yeah, you're right. It just seems kinda ridiculous. So, did anything come of it?
Yeah, actually. It wasn't easy, but I think I found something that can point us in the right direction.
So, what is it?
I don't think it does you any good if I told you everything. I think you should get some rest, and we can discuss it in the morning.
What makes you think you know what's best for me? If you did, I wouldn't be in the shit I'm in right now, I said through gritted teeth. Don's face hardened, the rising anger apparent in his face, but the attempt to quell it was just as visible.
You know, Jack, I've put myself through hell far more literally than I'd like, all to find a way to deal with this. I know you've had it hard these last 2 decades, but please, give me the chance to fix things.
A rising wave of anger jolted through me at his tone, the way he talked down to me like a child. But I too did my best to quell it. Whatever, Don. Let's just get to bed. There was just one thing that I couldn't let go of, a suspicion that had been brought to the surface the second I reunited with him. Have you killed anyone since we left Sunset? I asked.
What, you want a fucking list?
I didn't. Instead, I was content with letting us fall back into the all-too-familiar silence and let our grievances sink to the bottom of some murky pool that neither of us had the energy to acknowledge at the moment. Though a myriad of fears were flooding my mind, exhaustion was the most prevalent of burdens. I could deal with what awaits us in the morning. For now, I'm content with letting the hum of the ceiling fan lull me to sleep, and let the ghosts of memories long past haunt my dreams. A kaleidoscope of memories cycled quickly through the dreamscape of my mind, pausing for painfully long on the moments that defined my life and my foretold downfall. I was forced to relive them with unsettling lucidity. I saw the old forsaken town of Sunset, that inescapable place, daring me to break free from its grasp, and how I swore I would, how Don promised we would. And then I recalled us, the night that defined us. I remembered the gusts of cool midnight air, dancing through loose clothing and tickling sensitive skin, the faint smell of asphalt and burnt rubber, and the way my arms tensed around Don as he accelerated his brother's bike to dangerous speeds. We stopped at the city limits. The looming highway beyond was an impassable barrier we swore would one day crumble.
Fuck if I know. California or Nevada, it doesn't really matter. As long as it's far away from this shithole and it's with you, it's enough.
Were his exact words when I asked where we would even go. They were crude but said with such sincerity that I grew to cherish them. Fast forward to the end of that school year when Don graduated. It was a surprise, given his long list of suspensions that prevented him from walking. But the fact that he had been handed his key to his freedom was enough. I wasn't so fortunate. I was only a junior, another year barring me from the same luxury. Our summer came and went with little fanfare. We spent it as any adolescent boys would, indulging in generally harmless mischief. By the time the school year started, I had grown impatient and moody. Don noticed this change and spent most days lifting my spirits, and it worked to bring a fleeting sense of ease that all but faded by the next school day. I'd found myself getting used to the rhythms of mundane life far sooner than I'd like to admit. Even the moments shared between Don and I had fallen victim to repetition. Every school day ended predictably, with Don picking me up and us heading to the usual spot. At the edge of town was a heavily wooded area that Don was particularly fond of. Beyond its tree line, you could find yourself completely alone out there. And with isolation came privacy, an undervalued commodity in this town. The infamy surrounding the woods was effective at scaring most people away. Rumors of Satanists and pagan cults performing sacrifices and rituals circulated throughout the town during the satanic panic that characterized much of the 80s. Rumors that fascinated Don, and it was under his suggestion that we began exploring the woods. Specifically, a massive cave entrance that dropped down into unknown depths. This cave, never being fully explored, led many of the older town residents to claim that it was a gateway to hell, and that it was integral to the rituals of the miscreants they feared so much. Don and I spent a lot of time in those woods, searching for the things let loose onto the world through the gates of hell. However, that night was spent entangled on the hood of his starlit car, dreaming of the future, entranced by the freedoms it promised. As Don leaned in closer for a kiss, a voice cut through the night air. "The hell are you boys doing?" it asked in disgust. I jolted up to see that it belonged to Bruce Anderson, the local town hero. Bruce had been closer than anyone to leaving Sunset Valley after receiving a full ride to Ohio University thanks to his football talents. Back when the high school still had sports programs, an injured knee anchored him back to the town, and as he aged, he took it upon himself to be the unofficial town sheriff, policing local hotspots for delinquent behavior. I think because fame and glory were once within his reach, that he lusted so fervently after the little power he could hold over the residents of a small town. Then again, all it took was a bit of misused power and mass hysteria to fuel the fires of Salem. Whatever the case, he liked poking his nose into other people's business, taking moral high grounds, and dictating acceptable behavior and language. "You know I could tell your parents about this."
Does it look like I give a fuck?
Don responded. "Come on, man. Let's just go," I pleaded with Don.
Fuck that, I'm not gonna let him get away with this shit. Hey Bruce, you're a worse gossip than a bored fucking housewife.
Don always had a way of getting under people's skin, and it was evident by Bruce's darkening expression that his last comment stung. To have his manhood challenged by the considerably younger Don infuriated him. He took a threatening step forward as he spoke his next words. "Let me ask you a question, boy. If the sky were to open and the hand of God reached through to smite you and only you, what would you say? Would you still be this smug?"
Well, I'd say that I'd have it coming and that it's about damn time. But I'd also say that I wouldn't be the only one that deserves it. I mean, didn't you knock up a 17-year-old? Last I heard, she wasn't doing too well.
Bruce's face contorted in anger. If Don had stung him before, this time he tore into the man's very core. For all his pride in his unwavering faith, it was juxtaposed with his boastfulness about how red-blooded he was. There was a particular irony with men like him, claiming piety and virility within the same breath. It's that irony that made it so easy for Don to back Bruce into a corner. "Know this, boy. Our lives are nothing but the consequences of our choices. You'll face yours soon enough." He turned and walked away with a huff, never knowing just how eerily prophetic his threats were. The girl that Don was talking about was Alice Easton. Her recent suicide rocked the community, and in a town that thrived on rumors, it was hard to get cold hard facts as to what led to her death. The more believable ones claimed that her parents forced her to abort to save face, and that she was so ashamed or guilt-ridden that she saw death as her only solace. Rumors as to who was the father tended to point to Bruce more often than not, as his inappropriate comments toward underage girls were well known but seldom talked about, and whispers of his salacious relationships had plagued him for over a decade at this point. In the past, everyone let it slide as he was the town's Gold Star resident. However, this time, reverence could not shield him from such severe accusations. The few known facts were that Alice was pregnant, as confirmed by the town doctor, and that her death was ruled a suicide. This was only one of Bruce's many sins. A foolish man, layered thick with hypocrisy and unintentional irony. If only he knew he too would face his consequences soon enough. I like to think that everything is bound together, like a spool of thread, and all it takes is a little tug to set off a chain of events that makes it all come apart. Causality, or whatever force people want to name it. The effect is always the same. Looking back now, I think this was the tug, and Alice was the thread that would unravel us all. Don drove me home in silent anger. I hated to see him seethe. My inability to calm him made me feel so powerless. By the time we reached my driveway, I'd settled on giving him space. As I was opening the door to leave, his hand shot out and grasped mine. I turned to him and saw that his face had softened. Don had a rough exterior that seemed near impossible to crack, but very rarely he showed a shy, pensive innocence. For someone like Don to show such vulnerability meant that he truly trusted me. It was a revelation that left the heart with a tender ache.
Hey, just wait for me, okay? Just one more year, and we can drive far away from here. Go wherever the fuck we want. So, just wait for me.
You know I will. I always do.
I'm sorry, it's just this place, these people, they piss me off. I'm just worried that they'll get to you.
They won't. They haven't for 17 years, and they won't now. Don let out a half chuckle, half sigh, and perked up as he spoke.
Tomorrow night, let's make it past that highway and into the nearest town. We can spend the rest of the day driving around, seeing new things.
Didn't you say that you've always wanted to see the ocean?
I don't think we'd have the time.
But we will, I said.
Yeah, we will. And that's all that matters.
I went to bed that night, repeating the words in my head, like a mantra I desperately wanted to believe. I fell asleep, not knowing how short-lived they would be. The next day I was unable to focus on any of my classes. I wanted to see Don, wanted to see more of the world that had eluded me for so long. A world that held the promise of freedom. If I had known it would be the final day before it all went to shit, I wouldn't have spent it lamenting about the tedium of everyday life. I could have spent the day saying goodbye to everyone, making amends and anything else. If I'd gotten the chance, maybe I would have found some closure, and the 20 years that would follow wouldn't have been so guilt-ridden and desperate. There was something off when Don came to pick me up after school. It was subtle, but I thought I saw the slightest signs of nervous tension in Don's movements. It was rare to see anything unsettle him, let alone make the man anxious. Or maybe he was just good at hiding it. Whatever had happened, it must have been enough to pierce through his iron demeanor. The drive was silent and uncomfortable. It wasn't like last night. there was a more profound unease here. To my surprise, he pulled toward my street and into my driveway. "Hey, Don? What's going on? I thought we were—"
I need to do something real quick. Can you wait for me just a bit longer?
Don cut me off. "Sure," I said uneasily. He peeled out of my driveway, and I was left with the fact that this was the first time he had lied to me. I waited for hours, anxiety building with each one that passed by, and by the time night fell, it had shifted to sickly fear. It was nearing 10 p.m. by the time I heard the familiar sound of Don's car engine as he pulled into my driveway. I rushed out to greet him, but saw immediately that something was not only still wrong, but things had also worsened. Don had a crazed look in his eyes. He said nothing when I got into his car, and only responded with a grunt when I greeted him and shrugged off my questions. He started the car and drove toward the woods. Instead of the highway like I had anticipated, Don finally pulled over as we neared Hell's Gate's cave entrance.
Jack, I fucked up. I fucked up big time,
Don said. "What do you mean? What happened?" My questions and pleas were met with silence, and instead, he led me to the trunk and popped it open. I peered in and nearly doubled over, trying to hold back the urge to vomit. Waves of nausea radiated throughout my body as I took a step closer. The inside of his trunk was stained with blood, some of it pooling in the corners. But the thing that stuck with me the most was the glazed look in Bruce's eyes, and his partially exposed skull slick with crimson. With another thread pulled loose, the world around me began to unravel. I jolted awake with the sound of the motel door being flung open with incredible force. I tried to get up to confront the intruder, but my body was locked in place by a tremendous weight. I was completely paralyzed, unable to even open my eyes. The stench of death wafted into my nose as I felt a being approach the foot of my bed. The sound of contorted limbs snapping and tearing preceded the arrival of the creatures I had encountered earlier, the scent of awful decay accompanying them. Several beings now stood in the room. Their unintelligible whispers rose to shrieks that reverberated throughout my entire body. I was on the verge of cracking from the sheer sensory overload when a voice, otherworldly in its tone, spoke and deafened all others. I recognized it, having heard it in my dream. "She who sits upon a crimson throne awaits," it said. The crushing weight subsided, and I rose to gaze upon the being. It stood there, levitating several inches off the ground. It wore a blue cloak that obscured the entirety of its body. Behind it stood 4 flesh constructs. They seemed to be made of mostly human parts, as some of its limbs were recognizably humanoid. However, patches of fur, teeth, eyes and limbs suggested that local wildlife was assimilated into their crude forms. The cloaked being nodded and dematerialized, leaving nothing behind but wisps of navy blue smoke. The flesh constructs collectively let out a garbled yelp and then proceeded to writhe their way out of the hotel, the sound of their bones resounding in the late night air. Don's chuckle broke the bewildered stillness.
Well, I guess that's as good a sign as any to get the fuck going.
Don said. What the hell was that?
One of her bishops, I'm sure.
A bishop? The cloaked things in my dreams were bishops?
Yeah, the blue one's named Ciliothean, I think.
You know their names? How?
I'd be more worried about why one showed up here.
I don't know, Don. Since you know fucking everything and insist on keeping me in the dark, enlighten me. Why do you think they appeared before us now of all times?
Maybe they were eager to greet us. Or impatient.
So what do we do now?
There's only one thing we can do, Jack.
Don's eyes were somber. Funny thing is, I don't think I'd ever seen him look so sad. After a few more tense moments, we got up and set out to make the final leg of our journey. The few hours we drove were spent in silence. Don's face and emotions now indiscernible. I sat in self-resignation. I heard the bishop say it many times in dreams. We wouldn't leave sunset. Not this time. She who sits upon a crimson throne demands our life as a tribute, to be part of her unholy court. I know now, ever since Dawn killed Bruce, her invisible hand held onto us by the throat. Her greed ensured that no matter how far we fled, we would always return to her, whether by choice or by force. The nightly dreams, the stalking creatures, it was all her doing. As the first rays of dawn peeked past the clouds, we finally reached the city limits sign on that seldom traveled highway and turned onto the road that would lead us into town. After we departed from Sunset, the road and the hillside were hidden away, made invisible and inaccessible to anyone. Until now, I knew that it would be waiting for us to cross its borders. What I didn't expect was the vile sight that awaited us upon cresting the hills into sunset. I knew the sky above sunset would be shattered and torn open, but to see the majority of the town to be blanketed in pulsating muscle and flesh brought out a visceral, gut-wrenching fear I didn't know was possible. Unfamiliar structures dotted the outskirts of the townscape. New additions, constructed entirely of flesh and bone, bound by sinew. I was left speechless by the sight, and even Don seemed taken aback. No witty retorts to break the tension and horror. This cemented everything. There was no turning back. This was the end. Not just for us, but for the world. Upon the completion of the capital, she truly claims her throne and throws the world into chaos. And by the looks of things, it wouldn't be long. Where the final pieces? The reason why the bishops acted in such urgency. It's a funny thing, actually. I should have seen this coming, but I never truly accepted its possibility. How can you, when faced with such a tragedy? Can anyone truly claim to be content walking to their own death? Can anyone claim to be at peace, knowing that they would be the catalyst for so much suffering? Closure has evaded me after 20 years of contemplation, and frankly, I don't even know if such a thing exists. I fear for the fate of my daughter, my loved ones, and for all who read this and know of what's to come. A man once told me that our lives are nothing but the consequences of our choices, I guess it's time to face ours. I started the car engine and drove towards sunset, towards her beckoning hand, towards our end.